If there's one thing I want people to know about me, it's that I love kaiju movies. For as long as I can remember, I've loved the idea of giant monsters dominating the big screen, sometimes alone, other times fighting one another. And today, I wanted to give my thoughts on some of the more recent giant monster flicks, the Monsterverse. Though only 4 movies long, the Monsterverse has already made an impact among kaiju fans, grossing over $1.9 billion. Though maybe not on the scale of Marvel, it's still an impressive total, especially when you consider the popularity of some of these kaiju outside of their usual territories. Now it's time to rank them, from worst to best. Now, I want to mention that while I don't think these movies are disasters in any way, they each have their own flaws, which I plan to talk about as I go through each entry. They also have their own strengths, and while they're no Citizen Kane, I still find them to be widely enjoyable films. I should also mention that all this is strictly my opinion. If you agree or disagree with how I rank these films, by all means, leave a comment below. Now, let's get started. I really hate putting 2014's Godzilla last on the list. Ever since watching Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla as a small Babu Titan, I've been such a huge fan of his. And let me tell you, I was so excited about the return of the King when it was first announced. But while not bad, I do have my problems with it. For starters, the movie, especially when the kaiju start showing up, gets way too dark, visually speaking. I can maybe understand nighttime being more atmospheric, but this is a giant monster movie. I want to see the monsters as clearly as possible. I also have a love-hate relationship with how Godzilla was used in the movie. On the one hand, I do like that every time he appears on screen, it feels like a big deal. When he first appears in full, it's genuinely one of my favorite moments. I also like the idea of him being this ancient protector of Earth, squashing out any real threat that might come to it and its inhabitants. On the other hand, using him so sparingly kind of lessens the fact that this movie is all about Godzilla. Sure, human characters always have a space in Godzilla movies, but it felt like overkill for this one. Speaking of the humans, the cast of characters is rather weak. Outside of Bryan Cranston and Ken Watanabe, everyone else is rather lackluster, with the only real piece of memorable dialogue being Watanabe's "let them fight." And what happens when the monsters do fight? That's another sore spot for me. Cutting out the first fight between Godzilla and the male Muto is a real cheap excuse to pad out the movie until the final battle. Said final battle between Godzilla and both Mutos is fine enough, and there are some really cool moments from it, but between how dark it is visually and the Mutos just being okay at best, it just falls short of what makes a good kaiju film. Now, while this movie is worthy of Godzilla's return in the long run, at least for international audiences, there are far too many glaring holes that make it the weakest of the Monsterverse films. Props to Gareth Edwards for making Godzilla feel like a force to be reckoned with, but that's about it. From one reboot of a franchise to another, Kong Skull Island is another flick worthy of showing why Kong is considered one of the kings of the Monsterverse. Was it going to surpass the original King Kong or even Peter Jackson's interpretation of it? Nah, but it didn't really need to. The whole point of a kaiju movie should be that it's dumb fun for its entire duration, not to reinvent the wheel. And even though I'm not his biggest fan, Kong is a true badass throughout the entirety of his movie. Visually, I'm glad a good portion of the film takes place during the daytime, as it helps showcase not just Kong, but the entirety of Skull Island in all its savage glory. For that matter, it helps to actually see what's going on, even when it's nighttime. The way Kong is presented is also a big step up from Godzilla, showing both his kaiju instincts as well as that spark of, dare I say, humanity that makes him so relatable. Every time he's on screen, it's a big deal, be it fighting helicopters, eating an octopus-like creature, or fighting the baddies of the movie, the Skull Crawlers. Trust me, there's quite a bit of kaiju fun to be had in Skull Island. When it comes to the movie's human cast, it's probably the strongest out of all the Monsterverse shows. Tom Hiddleston, Samuel Jackson, John Goodman, Brie Larson, it's pretty stacked. Even John C. Reilly, who I tend to view as a comedy actor, does a decent job as Hank Marlowe. Jackson is a believable villain whose motives make sense, for a kaiju film that is, and the rest of the cast did pretty well too. So, why is Kong number 3 on the list if there's so much good about it? Well, the biggest problem I have with the movie is that it's rather predictable. There are times where it feels like the movie is just going beat by beat up until the end credits. Not to mention, while rooted in what made the other Kong movies good, it's a story we've seen before. Military views Kong as bad, but Kong is actually good in comparison to what else lurks on Skull Island. But wait! Kong kills Jackson's soldiers, but also Kong is just defending his turf. It's all been done before. Hell, one could argue we saw a form of this story in Godzilla. Also, I can't help but find it funny that they managed to fit in the whole Kong likes the ladies in this film with Larson's character. When it comes to the other kaiju, they're fine. The skull crawlers are on the same level as the Mutos for me, being fine additions but ultimately forgettable. The fight between Kong and the big skull crawler is definitely worth to see it though. Seeing Kong innovate his ways to beat it was fun to watch. But perhaps my biggest problem with the film is the way it handles some of the human characters. A lot of them die by the end of the film, which is fine, but it feels like it's done more for the shock factor than anything else. Especially John Goodman's character. How can you do Goodman dirty like that? All in all, Kong Skull Island is an improvement, and a good way to shift the Monsterverse's focus back onto the kaiju aspect of things, but its predictable story and its handling of human characters, though not entirely important, keeps it rather low on the list. Godzilla vs. Kong is an odd movie. I know that's saying a lot about a film that features a radioactive lizard going up against a gorilla, but I can't help but feel somewhat cheated. But I'll get back to that in a minute. There are valid reasons for GVK making it this high on the list. The primary reason being the moments both Godzilla and Kong are on the screen. From Godzilla hunting down various Apex cybernetic complexes, Kong communicating via sign language, the Titans fight on the barge in the middle of the ocean, the battle in Hong Kong, there's a lot of fun kaiju moments to be had. The 3 rounds that feature Godzilla and Kong were a sight to behold, and one would argue that the effects used were the best in the Monsterverse. The story of Kong getting too big and too powerful for his confinement, therefore allowing him and the humans to finally explore the Hollow Earth, was just so cool. It opens up so much potential and possibilities for the movie and future Monsterverse showings. The story, while simple, might also be the strongest of the 4 movies. It's Godzilla vs. Kong. 2 kings battling it out to see who the true apex is. It really doesn't need to get deeper than that, and for the most part, it doesn't. Even going so far as showing Godzilla as a cerebral predator, while showing Kong as humanity's sparks, was all the true definition of dumb kaiju fun. Even Mechagodzilla showing up at the end and showing what kind of dominant force it is was a special treat. So, where does it all go wrong? Let's start with the human cast. Now, there's nothing really wrong with the cast, but I personally wasn't a fan of the Titan conspiracy theorist, played by Brian Tyree Henry, or Millie Bobby Brown's friend, played by Julian Dennison. Both were the weakest additions to the movie, really only serving as comic relief in a show that didn't really need it. It would have been stronger if the conspiracy theorist was just a renegade employee, and if the whole friend of a major character was scrapped, perhaps in favor of giving Kyle Chandler a bigger role. The rest of the cast is fine though. Bringing in Shun Ogiri? I'm so sorry for butchering the name, as Ren Serizawa was a really cool wrinkle to add, but they really didn't do too much with him outside of, I'm angry at the Titans for killing my daddy. Much like with 2014's Godzilla, I have a love-hate relationship with how Mechagodzilla was treated. Don't get me wrong, the mechanized monster was done justice for its iteration, proving to be troublesome to both Godzilla and Kong. But maybe they made it too powerful? Seeing it wreck shop with Godzilla didn't do the king of the monsters any favors, and it even steamrolled through Kong pretty well until the ultra mega radioactive infused axe came into play. Well, that and some interference from a drink, because humans have gotta be useful in some way, I guess. I also don't mind Kong being the one to ultimately finish Mechagodzilla off, I just wish it wasn't at the expense of Godzilla jobbing out. So, why do I feel cheated by this movie? Well, let me somewhat repeat myself from earlier. This is Godzilla vs. Kong. This should be the pay-per-view, the Super Bowl, the WrestleMania of the Monsterverse films. It should be the culmination of what could be phase 1 of the series, and while there's a lot to like about it, it just doesn't live up to its lofty expectations. Also, and I can't really believe I'm saying this, but the movie was too short. The ending especially felt rushed, and while I like Godzilla and Kong coming to an understanding and leaving them to rule over their respective domains, I just felt it all could have been handled better. Oh, and while I didn't mind the team-up, Godzilla straight up won in the battle against Kong. Don't at me. Remember at the beginning, I said that I love kaiju films, with Godzilla movies usually topping as my favorites. I didn't say that just for the sake of saying it, I meant it. I've watched every Godzilla movie at least once in my lifetime, enough that I could probably rank my favorites of the bunch. But that's a different story. The point is, I am biased towards Godzilla when it comes to giant monster films. And it's why, in my opinion, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, tops as the best movie in the Monsterverse. Look, to preface, this movie is by no means perfect. I have my problems with it, like I do with every other Monsterverse film. The humans aren't that interesting outside of a select few, the pacing is kind of all over the place, and the overall film feels somewhat bloated. But I can't help it. I just love this movie so much. It takes a lot of what makes a good kaiju film and fills it to the brim here. It's the only film in the Monsterverse that makes me feel like a kid again every time I watch it. For starters, the monsters that were provided are superb. Godzilla is the MVP throughout the movie. Ghidorah once again proves why he's Godzilla's greatest villain. Mothra got much needed love after being out of the spotlight for so long, and even Rodan got a much needed design boost thanks to the visual effects used. Seeing them all in action and interact with one another is just so much fun. Ghidorah especially is fun to watch, proving that an alien presence in the Monsterverse isn't so out of this world. And the action! Every time the kaiju are on screen, you're treated with an action-packed moment. From Godzilla and Ghidorah first facing off, Ghidorah and Rodan colliding in the air, the battle in Boston, it's all there for your average kaiju lover. I also really like the use of colors and cinematography throughout the film, giving us good glimpses of each monster in some way. And while I never actually gushed about it in the other entries, the musical score is off the charts. Truly, it deserves to be talked about as one of the best in Godzilla's long line of scores. Now, unfortunately, come the cracks in this otherwise great monster film. As mentioned, the pacing of the story is kind of all over the place. It starts off strong enough, showing where the main characters were at the end of Godzilla. From there, you see Vera Farmiga and Millie Bobby Brown in a Monarch outpost, where we get an immediate glimpse of Mothra in her larvae form. Then you get a tense moment of these eco-terrorists coming in to steal a machine from Farmiga called the Orca that helps deal with the Titans. Then it all kind of falls apart from there. Kyle Chandler blames Godzilla for the death of his son in San Francisco. Farmiga believes that releasing the Titans is the only way to save the Earth. It's just all so hokey. Don't get me wrong, Farmiga is a believable villain. Just watch her in the Bates Motel series. But really? The only way to save the planet is to let some of the most dangerous of the Titans run amok, especially Ghidorah? What kind of crackpot plan is that? When it comes to how bloated the movie feels, I'm primarily talking about the monsters used in it. I loved seeing each monster in action, but giving 4 iconic kaiju enough time in the spotlight was already going to be hard enough, especially since you knew the humans were going to take a good chunk of the screen time. Speaking of, while the movie isn't as dark as Godzilla, there are still too many times where the monsters are shrouded in dark areas, particularly Ghidorah. I mean, come on, having control over winds and thunder and all that such is really cool and all, but he's a giant golden dragon. I want to see him in all his glory. Hell, the only monsters you really get a good glimpse at are Godzilla and Rodan, who benefited from their time in the sun. Oh, and the movie made the same mistakes of cutting away from the monster action just one too many times, with Rodan and Ghidorah and the Battle of Boston being the most egregious of the practice. Seriously, stop doing that. It's annoying. Yet, despite its problems, I still ended up greatly enjoying this film. It felt like the pay-per-view of monster movies, giving 4 of the best a playground to do what they do best in. It's what I said a kaiju film needs to be. Dumb fun that doesn't overstay its welcome, while also providing some fan service that, while maybe not needed, was greatly appreciated. But what did you think of the Monsterverse films? Let me know in the comment section below, as I look forward to hearing your guys' thoughts. Here's hoping the Monsterverse continues in some way, shape, or form.